started. My name is Chelsea Dyer. I'm the manager of engagement, and we appreciate all of you joining us this morning. All of the participants are muted, and as you know, you don't have video, but feel free to use the chat function. I saw Faye, she chatted in and said good morning to everyone, to all panelists and attendees. So feel free to do that, especially if you have questions for Derek or Jeff. And you can send that to all panelists and attendees so others know your questions, or feel free to just send it to all panelists. And we'll be keeping an eye on those and have a little bit of time, hopefully at the end, to come to those if you have them. We are recording the call. So if you want to come back and check it out later, if you missed something or want to rewatch, we will have a recording of it. And then one thing, hopefully everyone saw the great gift that Credit Union of America, as our presenting sponsor, is providing. I will be sharing a list of attendee emails with them after the call. So if you don't want your email shared, please just send me a quick email letting me know that. But if you called in on your phone, please go ahead and chat in your name, just because sometimes it will just pull up with your phone number and we want to make sure we know who was here. So if you called in, please just chat in your name for us, so that way we can make sure to add you to the list that we share with Credit Union of America. During the call and anytime, I encourage you to follow along with the Chamber on social media. Tweet along or share any great thoughts that you've heard and use the hashtag Chamber Wichita. And along with social media, our annual social media contest kicked off on Monday this week, so just a couple of days ago, and runs through August 21st. It is the Wichita Flag Summer Travel Contest. There are obviously some travel limitations in place this year, and we know that annual entries are going to look a little different, but we still encourage you to post your staycation and vacation pictures with your flag swag, whether that's snapping a photo at the end of your driveway or in front of a local landmark or on a short road trip. And the goal of the contest is to inspire more pride in our local community and strengthen our ties with the Wichita Flag fans around the world. And to date, we already have entries from residents in Kansas, Arizona, and Colorado. So definitely join in and participate along with us on that. So this morning, we are joined by Frank Schaffner, President of Credit Union of America, and our presenting sponsor for the May Sunrise Scrambler, which is virtual now. So I'd love to turn it over to Frank for a little bit.
Good morning. Well, I don't know about you, but I got to say, I feel like I've been living in the Twilight Zone. For you youngsters that are unfamiliar with the Twilight Zone, the episodes generally were based around a disaster of some kind, whether atomic bomb, Martians, could even have been a pandemic, but many times the main character was the only one left on Earth. And actually the same feeling I got a time or two driving down Kellogg or through our shopping areas. In the past, when I worked on disaster recovery plans through work, I noticed the pandemic section, and I always thought, well, that'll never happen. And but here we are. So video is what we got, and we'll make the best of it. First, big thank you to our healthcare workers, and I don't know if we have any healthcare worker folks with us this morning, but if we do, a big thank you. And actually, I miss Big Al's warm, friendly, positive welcome from Davis Moore. So if you're out there, Big Al, hello from all of us. And about this time, I'd be finishing up the tasty breakfast, so I guess I missed that as well. But as was said earlier, as a presenting sponsor, we'll be sending you a special gift via email, so watch for that. And I was trying to think what to talk about just briefly today. I know I just have like a minute or so, but last couple months have been really interesting. And overall, I'm a half full type person, I guess. I try to see the good in people. And I had to shake my head at the few who were hoarding items like toilet paper and germ gels. I'm sure there are closets full of toilet paper and stuff. I just, like I say, have to shake my head. But for the most part, people are good and try to do the right thing. I'm fortunate enough to work with those who look at the situation we've been in and adapted. And over the last couple months, our mission here at Credit Union of America has been, how do we keep our employees and our members safe? But we do have to continue to do business to keep the lights on. I've learned a lot over the last couple months. Number one, I'm grateful for a healthy family and fortunate enough to be employed by a great company. I learned I've taken a lot of things for granted, and I'll even admit I'm spoiled. I think a lot of us are. My wife and I are accustomed to after work beers at our favorite haunts like Pump House, Mort's, Poorhouse, Bubba's. We go to the Monarch. We just, that's kind of what we like to do after work, especially Friday nights. Meeting my buddies for breakfast at the Beacon or Doodah Diner, getting all jacked up on coffee before we come to work. But NCAA basketball, KU was #1 and no tourney. Oh my gosh. But daily lunch runs with my buddies, being around friends, and finally our wonderful baseball stadium that we haven't been able to use. It's right there waiting for us, and I can't wait. But most of all, I took for granted my family get-togethers and special hugs from our grandkids. We have a 2- and a 4-year-old, and it was really strange, but it was the best we could do was watch them play through the chain link fence at my son's home for the last couple of months, keeping our social distancing, and our little granddaughter Frankie couldn't figure out the hugs. She was always wanting to hug us and that. But one time that hit me as we were getting in the car, and I turned around and I looked, and I had to ask my wife Susan. I said, "What's Frankie doing?" And she looked and she said, "Well, she's giving you the international sign for I love you," and that was the best she could do. So I'll always remember that. But thanks Chamber for allowing Credit Union of America to be a part of today's program. And I'll just finish with, come see us at Credit Union of America. We'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Frank. I like your Twilight Zone reference. I actually have been trying to watch some of those, so I think that's a good representation probably of how some of us have been feeling a little bit during this time. So also this morning, and I believe we are, I think Big Al might be on the call, and some other Davis Moore team members. We want to give thanks to Davis Moore for being our Showcase Biz sponsor. All of you can pretend to look under your chairs right now for a treat to see if you put one under there for yourself. So one day we'll get back to doing that in person. So I would now like to turn it over to Gary Plummer, President and CEO of the Wichita Chamber, for a few remarks, and then to introduce our speakers.
Thank you, Chelsea. It's a pleasure to be with everybody this morning. We have a very timely program today from Derek Nielsen and Jeff Lucas of High Touch Technologies. And it's my honor to introduce these gentlemen to you today. Jeff is the Senior Director of Technology Solutions. He and his team provide dynamic, real-time client services for IT Solutions business unit of High Touch. The team prides itself on engineering a better customer experience by taking a proactive approach to technology support. Jeff has led various IT support teams during his career. He serves on the executive committee of the Wichita Independent Business Association and on the board of directors for the Kansas School for Effective Learning. In 2009, he was recognized as one of Wichita's 40 under 40 by the Wichita Business Journal. Jeff has a bachelor's degree in business administration from Baker University. Welcome, Jeff. It's also my pleasure to introduce Derek Nielsen. As president and CEO, Derek leads the technologists, the innovators, and the entrepreneurs at High Touch Technologies. Derek's focus is working with his fellow employee owners to ensure that the company's vision, strategy, and culture collectively support continued profitable growth. Prior to his role, High Touch was a long-term client of Derek's during his consulting career at AGH. He designed and led the company's strategic process from 2009 to 2014, which helped High Touch create a vision and strategy to grow and diversify. Most recently, Derek spent 4 years as Vice President of People Operations and a member of the executive team at Charles Machine Works, a leading equipment and solutions provider to the underground construction industry. Prior to getting into business, Derek served on Archbishop Desmond Tutu's Truth and Reconciliation Commission as a researcher and investigator following South Africa's first democratic election. He also worked as a legislative assistant to former Congressman, Kansas Congressman Dan Glickman, and spent a year as a volunteer teacher in rural South Africa. And I have to say and add that I've gotten to know Derek personally over the years since I came to Wichita in 2011. And I did that through his service for many years to Leadership Wichita, where he was an active volunteer, and also at the Chamber, where he helped us with some strategic planning a few years ago. We're very fortunate to have Derek back in Wichita. Welcome, Derek and Jeff, and we look forward to your remarks this morning.
Thank you so much, Gary. That's it's always humbling hearing somebody talk about, I mean, Jeff deserved all that, but it was kind of embarrassing hearing all that about yourself. But we're happy to be here and happy to be joining in and a part of kind of a new venture, trying to approach these scramblers and providing information a little differently. So thanks for joining us this morning. The new normal. It's a phrase we're probably all tired of hearing, but if you're like me, you're not only still hearing it, you're probably using it more than ever before. Why? Because it's appropriate. It's a useful shorthand for acknowledging that everything seems to be changing in ways unimaginable a few months ago. As business leaders, we've all managed some remote work before, but in the new normal, that's all that many businesses have been able to do for a couple of months now. Remote accessibility to data and programs, collaboration tools for the digital age, cybersecurity. All of these have been hot topics for a while. But since the pandemic, they've suddenly gone from interesting and potentially important to urgent and essential. Let's take the issue of cybersecurity as an example. Prior to COVID-19, many companies perceived one of their worst case scenarios as a computer virus that could take down their company's systems and take them offline. But in this crazy new reality, the opposite has actually happened. A human virus has forced almost our entire workforce online, making companies more reliant than ever on our systems. And this in turn makes the worst case threat of a computer virus that much more real and threatening. At the beginning of the stay-at-home orders, there were often jokes made about the corona baby boom that we might expect 9 months from now. As stay-at-homes persisted, several people have pointed out that that might only result in a mini baby boom, affecting just those couples that didn't already have kids. But joking aside, a colleague of Jeff's and ours recently remarked that it wasn't a baby boom he thought likely in 9 months, but rather a ransomware boom. Hackers and cyber criminals love to exploit crises, and in the mad rush to enable remote work, our systems have become more vulnerable than ever. Other changes have also been accelerated by the paradigm change to remote work. Video conferencing has gone from something enabled in a few fancy boardrooms to arguably the most important tool we use on a daily basis. Similarly, we've been scrambling to figure out what features our phone system really has and what value they can provide now that just picking up our handset at our office desk isn't an option. The changes we're talking about today aren't brand new. Just like remote work itself, many of these changes were already underway, but COVID has accelerated the pace and broadened the scope exponentially. I think it's important to note that the phrase new normal is also apt for another reason. We aren't describing this as the, quote, temporarily different reality for a reason. I personally don't believe we'll ever simply go back to the old normal of working almost exclusively on site. First, until an effective vaccine is widely available, we will have portions of our workplace working remote for periods of time on very short notice. Through contact tracing, we'll have employees from all parts of our businesses quarantined due to contacts made in both their professional and personal lives. I think that we're also going to see increased employee interest in the long-term option of working remotely more frequently, even if it's not all the time. Employers, for their own reasons, are also beginning to fully appreciate the possibility of successful remote operations, as well as the potential benefits of such a model. That's why I think the future of work for most of us is a hybrid arrangement, mixing on-site, remote, and mobile work in proportions suitable for different businesses, teams, roles, and individuals. With these changes come both opportunities and threats. In this presentation, we'll focus on 4 areas that you may want to consider more deeply as you proactively shape the new normal that's appropriate for your business. First, security in a remote or hybrid environment. Second, phone system features and options that enable flexible productivity in a remote or hybrid environment. And third, the difference between video conferencing tools and virtual collaboration platforms. And finally, financing solutions that provide options on how you pay for the technology that you need. Let's dig more deeply into the first topic, that of cybersecurity. If you remember nothing else from this presentation, I'd urge you to remember and act on this. Securing your IT infrastructure for an increasingly remote and mobile workforce is very different than securing it on-premise in the old normal. Let me illustrate why with a simple intuitive analogy. Think of your traditional old normal on-premise business model as a castle. Your most important assets like customer, financial, and operational data are all housed safely in a secure, reinforced place. Think of locked treasure chests stored in a guarded room, high up in a defended keep. And of course, the keep is located in the middle of the courtyard, safely ensconced behind high walls, patrolled by armed sentries, and supported by a wide array of defensive weapons. You know, in the analogy, this is our traditional on-premise world, where we're safe on-premise behind a firewall, leveraging traditional antivirus and email filtering. And in this analogy, the most important people, the king, the queen, the nobleman, the clergy, the artisans, the soldiers, all the citizens reside in the compound, venturing out only when needed through a fortified gate and across a drawbridge that can be lowered to span the moat that surrounds the castle. But even before the pandemic, this idyllic and simplistic picture didn't really capture the basics of most business models. For a start, most of our businesses can't thrive simply holed up in our castle anymore. People and data critical to our business come and go all the time. Essential work gets done and money gets made in the villages and the countryside that surround the castle. Residents and visitors come and go through multiple gates and entry points at all times, day and night. Assets are therefore being produced and exchanged everywhere by multiple people in multiple places. And while there are still valuables and key people in the keep, at least as many assets and people are out and about, far beyond the safe walls of the castle or the firewall or the traditional antivirus. Sentries on a wall, the antivirus, can no longer see everyone and everything in their charge to protect. Security has to be ensured at the endpoint, wherever the people and assets of the kingdom are found. Now, I could go on far too long, but before I stretch the analogy too far, I want to introduce Jeff, As Gary mentioned, Jeff's our Senior Director of Technology Solutions and oversees our operational team in Wichita. And Jeff's going to dig a little deeper beyond the analogy to flesh out some of the practical specifics that you should be considering as you adjust your cybersecurity to the new normal. He'll also share some thoughts on how to maximize the features of your phone system and your video and collaboration platforms for the new normal. So with that, Jeff, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Derek. Good morning, everybody. It's great to be with you this morning. Derek started the analogy with the castle, and I will continue to use that as a reference when we start talking about some of the tools and things and how they might tie into this. So first, let's talk about managing a hybrid office or remote devices and how they're different. When you're connected to a secured network or within your organization, your business, your network keeps you protected. Your firewalls ensure that only the approved traffic can access your on-premise network. I kind of think of the firewall as the moat there around the castle. If your on-premise firewall becomes out of date, God forbid the moat dries up, malicious users can penetrate security flaws and gain access to your business's essential resources. But when you're working remote, you don't have the benefit of that firewall. So it opens up possible opportunities for cyber threats that might not be as threatening when you're within your organization's walls or behind your network. You also have things like antivirus, which are searching for, detecting, and removing computer viruses, especially when all your devices are being actively monitored on an internal or on-premise network. A lot of the antiviruses that are used today are what we call definition-based. In other words, they are somebody has already gotten hit with this virus, and so the antivirus company has been able to identify that and essentially have a wanted poster for this bad actor or this threat. Definition-based antiviruses work by comparing files, data, etc., to a list of predefined viruses. Like I said, like a wanted poster. Going back to the castle times. It only works when the scans run and if the program knows what's bad when it's running the scan. So you need to, we try to continuously update those antivirus programs so that it's aware of the new threats. There is products out there called zero-day threat, which instead of going off of a definition or based threats or a threat that somebody else has already experienced, they work more based on the behavior of the threat. It doesn't have to be a pre-established threat. If it acts a certain way, a zero-day threat antivirus can detect and pick that up. Another solution we use is email monitoring, helping to block spam. But most importantly, also helps to mitigate phishing attacks and emails with viruses and the attachments. There is also zero-day threat solutions that exist in the email filtering as well. Again, some of the common terms we'll hear is advanced threat protection, which basically looks at emails that are coming inbound from outside your organization and can look at the attachments on an email, put them through a couple of filters, again, looking at the behavior to see how they react. And then if they react in a malicious manner, they can be moved to a sandbox and detonated in the sandbox so that it doesn't impact or cause any problems to the network. When you're home or remote and off the network and your device is potentially being used for more than work, you obviously have more exposure. And that's a lot of what we're dealing with right now, is trying to make sure that people understand that when you've been working remote for a while, you've had your system away from the firewall and some of the other solutions that are inside your organization. So it's really important to be careful when we re-expose those items back into the environment. The new threat landscapes, what attackers are doing and why. Sometimes ransomware will lie dormant for a while until the hacker finds the optimum time to reveal their presence and do damage. They're hiding until maybe the economy gets better, but they sometimes can be lurking there and avoid the antivirus, the definition-based antivirus. Think of that as kind of like the sentinel on the castle. You know, they're looking at predetermined times. They have a predetermined route that they take. But oftentimes they'll miss certain things, especially if it's not a predefined or an identified threat. One of the things that you can use to help to combat against these things are what's called endpoint detection and response solutions, or EDR. EDR recognizes systems behavior anomalies before a cyber threat affects your entire system. Once a device has been infected, EDR can quarantine it and notify the system administrator that a cyber attack has been detected. This is really, really key because it's all about the amount of time. The longer a threat is in the environment, the further it can infiltrate the environment. So EDR is a nice solution because it can begin to do that response. Again, it's endpoint detection and response. So it can begin to respond and quarantine and do things to mitigate the problem. As and again, to kind of tie that back to the castle theme, think of EDR as maybe an undercover sentry that doesn't patrol the castle walls, but is out among the people. And he doesn't just look at his wanted poster and say, "Ah, you're a bad actor. I know you. I need to take you in or quarantine you." But it can look and see, this guy kind of acts a little bit strange, or go up and talk to, that's a little bit strange, not acting quite right. I'm going to go ahead and remove you from the environment, and we're going to go have a little talk. So it's kind of like, again, tying it back to the castle theme. It's really trying to not just detect, but respond immediately to minimize the impact.
Hey,
EDR.
Jeff,
Sure.
Jeff, if I could just to add, before we move on and talk about cloud for a minute, I think it's easy to be overwhelmed sometimes as a business person when you read all this new stuff that's coming out and you're trying to assimilate it with everything you've known in the past. And is everything we did in the past now bad? And now we need to do these other things. I think it's really important. One thing I've heard you preach to people is it's really a layered approach to security.
Absolutely.
The traditional protection of a moat and a castle wall and sentries are still valuable. They're just not entirely sufficient anymore. And so the combination of things like EDR, which protects endpoints wherever they are with machine learning and advanced, artificial intelligence, is really important when as a complement to firewalls and traditional antivirus, which do different things. So I just jump in and say, as people learn more about this, realize it's not the old is bad or now unimportant and the new is all I need. It's really a balancing of the old and new and layering the right tools together.
That's a great point, Derek. It really is all about layering. It's kind of like, think of it as layering a mesh or a net. There is no one magic bullet when it comes to cybersecurity. There's no one solution out there that's the end all be all, that man, if you have this, you got nothing else to worry about. It's just not accurate. And the world of cybersecurity is a game of cat and mouse. It's a constant good versus evil. In fact, it's interesting when a lot of times some of the time certificates that people can get are a ethical hacker certificate. Notice you still have the word hacker in that certification, but it's ethical. You gotta kind of understand how the threats are coming at you, and you have to kind of learn to battle those by understanding how they're coming at you. But it is really important to layer those. A lot of times also, Derek, people think, well, I take my laptop home every night, so have I been exposed to a lot of threats all this time? Well, you're always going to be exposed to threats, but taking it home for one day versus being out for 2 weeks or 2 months, obviously you can see how you could increase the likelihood of a potential threat by being away from the castle, so to speak, for more than just a day. So all right, so as we were talking a little bit more about EDR, I did want to mention that the EDR itself does not just cover the whole thing. I mean, you've got to also, not only does it detect the cyber attacks and isolate the infected machines, but it alerts the administrators, and then from there they can begin to look and see, how far the attack has gotten. And again, with the response part of the EDR, hopefully it's quarantined it and limited how far the threat has manifested through the network. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit also about cloud infrastructure. A lot of people hear about cloud and talk about cloud these days, and some people are a little bit confused as to what it really is. We use Azure, which is Microsoft's cloud primarily, and to give you guys a sense of what the cloud, if you're using Office 365, you're using Azure, Microsoft's cloud. That's where that email is hosted. But Azure is really an ecosystem where you can host systems, much like email. You could put your file share out in Azure. You can put Active Directory out in Azure. You can put different components of your environment, or you can have the entire environment where you're completely hosted in the cloud. It's a nice option for organizations to use. It can be cost effective because you oftentimes avoid the big capital expenditure for hardware and licensing. So it is, and from a security standpoint, especially talking about Microsoft and the Azure cloud, aside from the US government, more hacking attempts are tried on Microsoft than any other organization, again, outside of the US government. So Microsoft has built trust in being secure, and that's kind of where they put a lot of time and effort and resources. In fact, one of the things about most of Microsoft tools is that they offer multi-factor authentication. But before we talk about that, I just want to wrap up a little bit more about Azure. I mean, Microsoft is used by 499 out of 500 of the Fortune 500 companies, so it's pretty secure. But a lot of people are starting to identify that they can move pieces of their environment to the cloud, help cover costs, and even as part of that, enable some additional security measures that can help protect their environment. Speaking of security features in all environments, one of the things that a lot of people are hearing about nowadays and that we really do recommend is multi-factor authentication. If you've done any online banking, you've probably used multi-factor authentication. Basically, it's just receiving a temporary code or finding a secondary means of authenticating that you are who you say you are, so that if a hacker or a threat gets a hold of your credentials, your login and your password, that isn't enough to get in to your account. They have to also have the second factor of authentication. It does reduce the likelihood of attacks, and it's really not that complicated anymore. It can be as simple as a program that you get on your phone, or even just using your phone as the device where you receive a text security code, or you use a security application that flashes temporary codes for specific applications. They're pretty easy to set up in most cases. When you when you're setting up the multi-factor authentication, it'll even flash a code on your screen that you can use your authenticator, take a picture of it, and it syncs it all up and sets it all up for you. So it's really become easy to set up multi-factor authentication. It can easily be used with a mobile phone. There's apps, like I said, authentication apps. And in some cases, like as technology progresses, you're seeing a lot more facial recognition as a means of multi-factor authentication. So those are additional ways that you can kind of secure your environment. And it doesn't just apply to cloud infrastructure. It does apply to a lot of different things. In fact, most applications worth their salt have some means of multi-factor authentication these days. If they don't, it might be time to look at a different application.
And Jeff, just to reiterate, this is in my mind, this is another really good example of layering. Security systems will be breached or compromised at some point in time in one way, shape, or form. That's true of everybody. What multi-factor authentication helps with is it adds another layer. So any of those breaches, even if a password, let's say, is compromised, a bad actor can't do something with it on your system. It's that extra layer of protection that says, even with some valuable information, I can prevent you from making good use of that credential to do something on our system we don't want you to do. I mean, think of it, we've all read, for instance, that Target or Best Buy or somebody else, their passwords were compromised. And all of a sudden we're worried that now my Cap One account is also compromised because it's the same password. And yes, I know I shouldn't have allowed that, but I did that, now what? If I have multi-factor authentication with Cap One, it means that that loss of that password is less dangerous because someone can't act and do something with it on a different account.
That's a great point, Derek, and especially, and sometimes people with passwords can be a bit of a challenge, right? Don't write them down. Don't put them on a file on your computer. But how do I keep track of 14 different passwords? Well, it can be a bit of a challenge, but that's where that multi-factor authentication can really come in handy, because it changes all the time. If you're using a code, it's a temporary code. The code's only active usually for 30 seconds, and then it'll reset the code. So they are multi-factor is one of the best ways to ensure that even if your credentials are compromised, that your system doesn't get breached. But Derek, even with all of the layering that you do with the various different security solutions that are available, there is one piece of this that is a really important layer, and there's no real magic bullet again to combat this, and that is user education. In our world, the biggest threat to your environment from a cybersecurity standpoint is the person in the chair behind the keyboard. It's been that way. It's 100% of the time. That is where the weakest security link resides. And it's not their fault. A lot of times it's just because they lack the education or the understanding of how to be careful when opening emails and things of that nature. So one of the things we really do recommend is that you frequently and consistently talk about cybersecurity in your company meetings, in your team meetings. If it's something that is being talked about regularly, it's going to be front of mind for your team members and employees. And if it's front of mind for them, that's what you're looking for. It just takes one oversight or one person in a hurry to click on a link to expose an environment. So it's really important to have those frequent and consistent security discussions and messaging. And there are also services out there that you can use for education purposes. And they also can be used to simulate phishing attacks. Recently, we worked with a client to simulate a phishing attack that had a COVID-19 theme to it. Again, striking at something that right now that is proving to be a vulnerability for everybody across the world, which is pretty unique these days. So those types of services that can both educate and can then be used to set up these simulated phishing campaigns to see if users are what we call clickers, if they're clicking on those links. We often try to explain to users, if you get an attachment or a link from an email outside your organization and you don't know who it is, click it. Be safe rather than sorry. Let's talk a little bit about phone system features that enable your success in a hybrid work environment. I won't begin to go over all these features, and I do believe this is being recorded and will be posted so people can pause here and look at some of these things as far as phone opportunity or features. A lot of people are asking, did our phone system make the transition to remote work a breeze, or was it a challenge? Challenges typically aren't due to the type of system that you have, but more attributed to the features that you have, unless your system is just really old. I know there are a few systems like Toshiba is end of life, and they're not building any feature and functionality on their phone systems anymore. But there are a plethora of features and functions on your phone systems, whether it be a hybrid, a cloud, or a on-prem, that can really help in a remote environment. Some of the things that I'm using myself as I work from home are what's called mobility. A lot of times you can set up to where if somebody calls my office phone, it rings my cell phone at the same time, not after a certain number of rings. I can set it up to do that if I want. I can also set it up to where when I call, it shows my office number versus my my mobile number. In some cases, if you're working from home, it might be kind of difficult to get people to pick up from a phone number that they don't recognize. We all know how much we get spam calls these days, and they spoof the number to make it look like it's coming from a local area code. Some other features and functions I just want to touch on real quick regarding phone systems. User remote IP phones, where you just take your phone home and you use your same phone as long as you're connected through a VPN network back to the office. What's called soft phones, which is basically a phone system application where if you've got a headset, you can make your computer act as your phone. Security for phone systems. Protect your network by selecting a voice over IP. That's what we call VoIP. System that is secure. Unified messaging, voicemail, email. Now that is not transcribing voicemail to email, but what it rather does is it'll just simply send you an email with a WAV file of the voicemail, so that if you can't get to your phone and your voicemail, you'll get an email saying, I got a voicemail message. You just listen to the attachment, you're up to speed. Call routing capabilities and features, things like auto attendance, call queuing, automatic call distribution groups, skills-based routing. We use those all the time in our help desk. Interactive voice response, music on hold, message on hold, call forwarding, redundancy, call screening, all features and functions that you guys are probably familiar with, but they can really come in handy when you're trying to work in a remote or a hybrid remote environment. Cell phones. Using your cell phone for business. If you haven't integrated your cell phones into your main phone system in some way, like as I said earlier, you could appear as a spammer, or the caller ID will come through, and the person on the other end won't necessarily answer. One of the things about cell phones that is really important to understand is that a lot of organizations allow their employees to bring their own device, or we call it BYOD. So they're bringing their own device and they're starting to use their personal cell phone for receiving company emails or using for company applications and things of that nature. One of the things we really would recommend is that you have some type of a policy in place for bring your own device. You want to make sure that you're securing the data that is going over those phones, especially should the employee leave the organization. It's good to make sure that the employee understands that if they use their own cell phone for work purposes, that if they leave the organization, the company can and will wipe whatever company information is on that phone off that phone, and that is a capability that exists with most of the mobile device management solutions that are employed by IT providers. So if you don't, it's important to have that and make sure the employee knows that they need to back up their personal stuff on their phone, because if they were to leave the organization, you wipe that phone, they could lose personal information as well. Yes, cell phones can be used securely with your phone system, and again, they can be done. Things can be done in a number of different ways, so that you can leverage your cell phone as part of your overall business phone system. Oh, video conferencing and virtual collaboration. Boy, this has never been more important than now, huh? Here we are right now. We're Zooming as we speak. And we want to talk a little bit about the different platforms out there and understand what they're used for based on what objectives you have. So for social hours, seeing a large number of participants, Zoom, which we're doing right now, Google Hangouts is pretty cool. They're not necessarily the best platforms for talking about confidential business due to lack of security features and potential to be hacked. I know Zoom's taken a lot of negative press because they've had some potential security features. So again, great for an opportunity to get together remotely and have a video conference. Not maybe the best thing if you're working on some important confidential business things. Traditional video conferencing solutions, but a lot of people have heard of things like GoToMeeting, Blue Jeans, Lifesize. Those video conferencing solutions tend to have a little bit more from security features, but only for video calls. The thing about things like Zoom and Google Hangouts, most of those are free. So you don't have a lot of security that's wrapped around them when you're using a free solution. Microsoft Teams is a great solution for what we call virtual collaboration, because not only do you have the video conferencing opportunity, but you've got file sharing, real-time collaboration in documents, instant messaging, calling, and video calls all in one platform. And sharing a file or a document is different than collaborating. When we talk about sharing, I could share via Zoom. We're sharing a PowerPoint presentation this morning, but from a collaboration standpoint, Teams offers the ability when you bring up a document, multiple people can actually update the document at the same time, effectively collaborating. The system keeps up and it shows you different colors and initials for different people where their cursor's at, and it really does a pretty good job of keeping up. So it really does work as a collaboration tool. Allows you to invite guests from outside your network to have them as part of your team, but you still maintain the ownership and control of security as the team owner. So that's a nice option there. Slack is another platform that I hear a lot about. Again, Slack has a free version and a paid version. I don't know much about the paid version, but this free version, generally speaking, Slack is property of the individual user, so the person who signs up for the license. By contrast, Teams is the property of the company, so the company has the license to it. Everything done in Teams stays in Teams and is the property of the company. No files go out on someone's local drive or that drive not coming back to the office. Data backup and access. Teams backs up. Teams backups belong to the company. Access can be granted and restricted by administrators. Slack, the account belongs to the individual. If you're looking for a chat functionality and not concerned about who owns any files on the platform, Slack may be a good option for you. There are just a lot of different platforms out there, and especially you're hearing a lot about them these days. Just be careful when you're picking up. Make sure that you're aligning your platform with what your needs are. And again, if it's just video conferencing, great. Use Zoom. Use some of these free options. If you're wanting to have more secure video, there are other options you can use. And if you're looking for something for collaboration, again, we really like Teams. It's really served us well. Luckily, at High Touch, we were already on Teams as an organization. So when the call to go remote came out, man, it was really, really simple. In fact, I would conduct a lot of the meetings in office over Teams just as a matter of convenience, so people didn't have to get up and relocate, especially being strewn across a couple of different buildings. It really does come in handy, and then allows you to share files, and then it can all be backed up. So it's secure and it's safe.
Thanks so much, Jeff. Let me jump in and I'll be relatively quick, and then we'll have a couple of minutes for questions if you do want to send questions. I do want to, by now you're probably wondering, okay, how much of this do I need to do and how quickly and how much does it all cost? First, I just want to point out there isn't one right combination of all the things that we talked about. This isn't one of those checklists of you pass or fail. You're either doing it all or you're not doing enough. Find a technology partner you trust that can help guide you through which of these investments, in what order, in which areas you need to best enable, your productivity, and also to protect your business. I want to make a quick point that when you do decide what options are right for you, there are many more financial options than ever before to allow you to construct how you want to consume and pay for the products and services you use. We've all heard about software as a service. I will tell you, the phrase now is X as a service, because you can put in anything as X. You can buy almost anything on a pay as you use or consume basis, including technology. So a lot of what before was had to be large capital expenditure to refresh your entire network that was on-prem. Today, there's technology as a service that allows you to invest in infrastructure on an OpEx basis, pay as you go, which is then for a term period of time, and the provider provides the refreshes, the patches, the security as you go. So it may be a higher OpEx monthly expense, but it doesn't require all the upfront CapEx expense. And it also allows you to refresh more frequently and allow the provider to continue to provide the most current and the new. It's kind of no different than taking your Apple cell phone and deciding you're going to pay for it on a monthly basis so it refreshes every year or 18 months automatically, instead of you having to save up and buy the new phone yourself. So there's many, many more ways to pay for it than ever before. I want to kind of bring this to a close by making a few comments that circle back to where I started with cybersecurity for the new normal. And I do it because A, it's the thing I think we keep reading about and we keep worrying about the most, but it also ties back to this whole new normal that we're trying to make sense of. I think it's really important to emphasize that you shouldn't panic or give in to scare tactics in this period of time. Making good technology and cybersecurity decisions in this new normal isn't that different from making good personal decisions about your health. We all understand that we take risks whenever we leave home or watch one of our loved ones do the same. But we also understand that it's a necessity. We're constantly balancing the desire for personal safety with the want and need to interact with family and friends, to work, to participate in events like weddings, and to find entertainment and relief from stress. We could spend a fortune on hazmat suits and respirators, and we still couldn't guarantee our safety 100%. The key, we all know intuitively, is assessing our priorities, needs, and options with a clear and informed eye so that we can appropriately balance risk and reward. Cybersecurity, much like physical safety, requires finding the right balance between protection and efficiency. This isn't a black and white world of secure or insecure. It's a choice on a spectrum that balances security against other important and valid considerations. But the choices and the risks and the options have changed dramatically, and they'll change only more as we go forward. It's important for you to reassess and not just assume that old answers fit how you want to be positioned in the emerging new normal. So with that, I'll try to maybe glance through some of the questions, and Jeff, if you'll do some of the same.
Yeah, Derek, I just checked them, was just jumping on and looking at it. There was a couple of questions that kind of dovetailed into each other. One of them asked about, had recently, their organization recently moved to Microsoft 365. What might be a top 1 or 2 potential vulnerabilities? Assuming multi-factor authentication's in place, I would think that probably user admin settings would probably be one of the bigger concerns from a potential vulnerability. Be important to know, especially if you're inviting people from outside the organizations, know how to set up the invites for people outside, know how to secure the documents and things that are going to be shared. Make sure your administrators understand how to work with, by example, teams to ensure that you've got things set up properly. Most of the vulnerabilities there would be around things not quite set up the way they should be.
Right. And you know, Jeff, I would just go back to that layered approach too. Part of the reasons why I'm so excited about endpoint detection and what it does is we've got so many people using things like Team remotely on devices that have not been behind the firewall for a while. Or maybe they're logging in on a browser from a personal website, right? One of those exposures that we all have right now are people are accessing work-related things through devices that aren't work issued. And we don't know what operating systems they're running them on and when they were last patched or updated. Right. So I think some of those, you know, EDR and those types of things that are constantly scanning real time wherever the devices are located is really important.
Yeah. One last quick question was, how can employees know if there's malware on their personal cell phones? Again, you've got to scan it. And there are a number of different solutions out there that you can purchase that you can put on a cell phone, a tablet, a laptop, workstation. Most of the platforms will go across different devices, but you've got to have something out there to go out there and look. And again, now comes the question of, is it definition based or is it 0 day, which means it's looking at behavior versus definition.
Yeah. You know, and Jeff, just to play off of that, again, one of those takeaways, I think, if you don't have a bring your own device policy or know what you want to include in that, now is a great time to be learning more about that and thinking more about that. We're only going to have more and more employees accessing company data or doing company business on their own devices. You know, the cloud, remote work, all those things enable that much more through browsers from
Absolutely.
any computer. It becomes much more important to establish what devices are okay to use in what settings. And back to your point about Slack, what applications you can use and in what settings. And then what company access there is to those devices. If they ever leave your employment and you need to ensure that that data is gone and removed, you need access to that. It can be a real point of contention if you haven't established that ahead of time. And make it easy for employees to use the right device, company issued or personal, for the right situation. So they're informed and making good choices. And there's a couple more quick questions. If we've got a minute, Jeff, I'm curious your answer to, are people using Zoom links as phishing? And then also malware detection for iOS. Any quick thoughts on those?
Well, if you looked at the link that we all received for joining this morning's call, it's quite a lengthy link and it's got all kinds of stuff in there. I haven't personally seen it, but I'm sure that there could be people. You can bury a phishing link in about, or you can bury phishing malware in about any kind of a link. So while I haven't heard of it, it's very possible that it could be.
You know,
Any recommendations?
Jeff,
Go ahead.
a quick follow-up to that, just because I read a really interesting article that made me think about something I hadn't been thinking about. You know, more and more we realize you can't trust phishing links, right? We're also getting better at being suspicious of phishing. And so, you know, typically we've often said, if you have any questions, call somebody to double check it's really from them. Yep. One of the things that hackers have been doing is saying, I will call you to verify this is really from me, right? And then the hacker is just calling in. Yeah. Or the other thing that, you know, you've got to warn people about is if your policy is call them to ensure it's really them, don't call them based on the telephone number in the email they sent you, right? Because that could have been supplied by the hacker. Call from the number you know from your contacts is their valid.
Exactly.
You
don't respond to it. Yeah, you don't respond to a phishing attempt. Say, is this legit? Because I guarantee you, the answer you're going to get is absolutely. That's right. They're hoping that you bite on that.
I thought it was brazen that now the hackers are calling in to confirm their own emails, which is interesting.
It is. So, but like back to that point of, well, could somebody bury this in a Zoom link? Could they bury something malicious in a Zoom link? But if you're expecting it and you know, okay, I'm getting this from the chamber, and you're checking to make sure that the sender is legit. These are things that you can do to at least give yourself some protection.
Yeah, Jeff, there was a question, and then we'll wrap up here. Malware detection for iOS. Do you have any short answer to?
My answer is I'm an Android guy. No, I'm just joking. I don't have any recommendations, TJ, for malware detection on iOS. I could probably get you some if you wanted to reach out. You'll see our contact information at the end of this presentation. I could probably look for some and get you some answers, but talk to some of my my engineer friends. But I don't have a suggestion off the cuff.
But we'll find you one if that would be
we
helpful.
Can find you. Yeah.
Thank you all so much for your time, attention, and good questions this morning.
Absolutely. I hope it was, I hope everybody got something from it. Thank you.
Yeah, Jeff and Derek, thank you both so much. A lot of great information and very timely information. We appreciate you taking the time this morning and also sharing your contact information so folks can reach out if they have any further questions. So thank you both, and thank you to Tara as well for operating the slides on the back end as well. So just a final thanks to our presenting sponsor, Credit Union of America, and Frank for joining us this morning. And then also to our Showcase Biz sponsor, Davis Moore. And we look forward to continuing to connect with everyone virtually. And we especially look forward to the time that we'll all be back together again. So thanks so much and have a great day.